So I decided to talk about God because it's a simple subject that we can cover in a few minutes. And the first thing that you have to do in any discussion about God is you have to say, okay, what's that? What is that thing? And there are three live versions of what God is today, and one dead. And the dead one is the God of springs and rivers and thunder. Very few people believe in that anymore. And well, it's not completely dead, but we'll talk about it last. We'll come back to it. So let's talk about the three live versions. So the first one is the bearded man in the sky, who tells you to behave in a sexist and tribal manner. And that kind of God is like very clearly a deceit, and that's all. There's not much to say about it. Discussions about evolution or any sort of apparently religious topic are actually discussions about politics, as to whether you should behave in a sexist, tribal, patriarchal manner or in a different manner. And the answer is always political. So the answer to creationism is not evolution, it's feminism. Interestingly, from time to time we get some interesting humans. We get some exceptional humans like Jesus or Muhammad or Siddhartha, and we call them prophets of God. And interestingly, their message is always totally humanist. They come up with the message that you should treat other humans decently. And before long, like barely after their deaths, they're embedded in religions by old men who tell you should act tribally and in a sexist way. So that's interesting. Anyway, enough of that. That's not a very interesting concept of God. The other, if you see someone who is believing in that kind of God, the thing you can do to them is not to disabuse them of a superstition, but to challenge their politics and say, well, you say the earth is created, it's because you're really saying you should obey authority or you should obey men or something. So it's purely a political answer is needed, not a scientific one. Now there's a second kind of God, which is like the God at the edge of the universe. So at first the gods were at the top of a mountain, and then they were like under the earth and higher up in the clouds, and then they were still in the sky but beyond the planets. And because our universe has a tendency to expand very fast, both literally and in terms of our understanding of it, this type of God is retreating to the edge of the universe all the time. And right now, that God is before the Big Bang. It's like what happened, who or what was there before the Big Bang that made it all happen. Because that's the only edge of the universe that we have left. And the modern version of that kind of God is that it's a young woman, it's like a hobbyist or a data scientist sitting at her computer running simulations, and like a lot of the time she puts in some variables for the density of vacuum, and then the whole thing explodes, and then or some other variables, nothing happens. And so she may be a bit frustrated because there's only like a very few fine-tuned variables where the thing seems to do anything interesting. And that's our conception of this type of God, the creator God who is running as a simulation because they find it interesting or something. That God is not, it's not ridiculous, it's not disprovable. It could very well be like that. The problem is not that this God is kind of wrong or implausible. The problem is it's not in any way helpful. So that type of God doesn't do anything for us psychologically. It's extremely unlikely that you'll be able to, I don't know, by doing some experiment, by creating a black hole or something in the lab, that you'd be able to attract the attention of this God, and that if you did, you would have any sort of interesting intellectual relationship with that being. So that doesn't do anything psychologically, and it also doesn't doesn't do anything at all as a form of explanation. So the God of the simulation replaces a very tight description of the universe, a description of the universe that requires fewer and fewer assumptions over fewer and fewer bits of information about what the very fundamentals were, replaces that with an extremely complicated ask of that, like there's a whole other universe with other creatures and a sort of a person with a computer, so to speak, who runs the whole thing. So it is completely unhelpful as an explanation of anything, the idea of a creator God. And so that's the main reason to reject it. It's not that it's provably wrong. It's just an incredibly useless and unhelpful explanation. My personal view is that you could say that this kind of creator God answers the philosophical question of why is there something rather than nothing. So why does anything exist in the first place? Never mind this particular way that it exists. And there seems to be a lot of developments in fundamental physics and cosmology right now. There's lots of clues that the universe isn't so, the variables of the universe aren't exactly where they seem to be. So if you have an electron, first of all, the uncertainty principle says that you can only have access to half of the variables of the electron, like either the movement or the position. If you have two electrons, you can arrange them, it's called entanglement. You can arrange them in such a way that you can have access to their relationship, like if they're opposite or the same, but not anything about each of them. So it looks like the variables aren't obviously where the material object seems to be. Lots of physicists are saying that space-time is doomed, that time and space are some kind of relationship that exists between quantum things, but not really what it appears. There is some effects that show that maybe there's two particles that are far away, but the variables are acting as if they are together. There is different alternative definitions of nature with many more or one fewer dimensions that are equivalent, and so it looks like there is some sort of change of representation that we haven't quite figured yet, that we will find that we'll find some more different, more economical definition of the structure of the universe that we haven't grasped yet. And the other thing that follows from these observations is increasingly it seems to be that all of the things that could happen, all the possibilities that are permitted are there. They're not there today or tomorrow, but because time is an emergent property, they're just there. And so if that turns out to be fully true, it's called the many worlds hypothesis in one formulation. But I suspect we'll find a more economical formulation that says that all the things that are permitted are consistent with each other, somehow are true. If that's true, then that replaces our metaphysical question with just one bit of information. Because the one bit of information could be either everything that is permitted isn't there, or everything that is permitted is there, and that's all. That's the only assumption. You have to make one bit's worth of assumption that everything that's permitted is actually there, and that's all your metaphysics that you need to do. Anyway, so enough about the God of the simulation. But there is one more kind of God. So there's one more thing that you could claim to answer this sort of religious sentiment. Well, so if you show this video to a friend and say, like, what's in this video? They'll say, well, it's a sort of middle-aged man philosophizing. If you ask another friend, and you have some interesting friends, they might say, no, that's not what I see at all. What you see is like there's some human cells, and I infer that there are other human cells behind them, kind of supplying them with chemical energy. and they're probably balancing on some sort of calcified skeleton that you don't see in the frame. And sort of in kind of that general area, there is some neural cells that are exchanging electrical and chemical messages with each other, and all of these things are philosophizing. And there's no person; there's just these effects. And your friend probably needs some hugs, but they have a very true definition of nature that they're describing. And there's a different take that there's a different way I could look at that. I could go in the opposite. I could change the definition of what is me quite in the opposite direction and say, well, I mean, I have a particular arrangement here in time and space, but the atoms that make up me have been reused many times. They came from stars. They'll probably go into something else later. And the genetic information that makes me came from others. And there's another embodiment somewhere, but it's not right here. And the ideas that came into me are obviously not mine. And hey, I just shared some ideas, so these ideas will maybe persist and be entangled with other people. So if I'm flexible about my, let's say, physical boundary, and I'm not particularly wedded to the illusion of self and the illusion of existence, then I can say, is there life after death? Sure. I mean, if I don't care about the illusion of experience, then sure, lots of these things will persist. And I'm very connected with many other things. So you could take this sort of reframing approach, and you could take it to the concept of God and say, well, God is something like the English language. So personally, I've never seen the English language. I've seen some dictionaries. I've seen like people behaving according to it. I've seen people attempting to teach it and claiming to have the truth about it. But I've never seen the English language or any other one. And yet, as with the previous metaphors, it's useful to say that it is a real thing. It's useful to say that there is a useful emergent property, that the useful concept of the English language, even though it doesn't actually exist, but we can, is a useful concept with a certain amount of reality. So we could say in a similar way, we could say that the concept of God is the collective behavior of humans, a collective amount of thinking of all the humans, or of animals, or of processes of the planet or elsewhere in the universe, this complexity that results. You could put the label of God to that, and you could say, well, when people feel a sense of transcendental sentiment, that there is something more important than us, or something to feel awe about, is this transcendental aspect of the universe. And sure, why not? I think, in my opinion, there is no, right now we don't have a very solid calculus for when there is emergent behavior and when there isn't. So we're just grappling with the situation. So we think, well, probably animals have some consciousness, but neural networks, well, we're not sure. We're not sure how complex they have to be, or if they have to have evolutionary characteristics in order to have interesting emergent behaviors. We don't have a good way, even though we grasp the reductivist version of the universe, we don't have a very clear a very hard grasp of when the emergent stuff happens. So people could say, well, God is the God of emergent complexity, and that's what we mean when we say God. And I would say, oh, okay, sure. I could believe in that. I feel some sort of transcendental spiritualism. The only thing is, it may not be that interesting. So it could be that it's a soft version of the Yea hypothesis, or it really means civilization or culture or humanity or something, or humanity plus some other creatures. So, but it's not there's something that to which you could attach the concept. It just might be much more down to earth than people make it. So finally, let's come back to the dead god, the god of the streams and forests and stuff. And so I think modern people we tend to think that the ancient civilizations were quite stupid. I don't think they were that stupid. So I don't think that necessarily the pagan gods were bad theories. I think they were a mix of that feeling of complexity in the world and a wish that there should be spirits, not a theory that there are spirits, but a wish that there should be some. And it's not that people felt that thunder or the forest or something, it was better explained by putting gods behind them, but they just really wanted someone to talk to and complain when things went wrong, or it made their psychological world better to imagine those myths than to not imagine them. So I think it was more of a form of art or a form of controlling the lens through which you see the world, rather than a stupid theory of explanation. So the modern world, the Christian world, has done many stupid things for godly reasons. There is much less evidence than the ancients did things for stupid godly reasons. There are some, like the pyramids, or the ancient oracles, but actually there's a minority, and mostly you'll find the ancients were quite rational, and maybe we do them a disservice, and maybe they were just feeling the same awe at the general complexity of things that is still there, or maybe they were just they were just inventing myths the way we invent movies. So anyway, so as you say, God is a very simple concept. There's not that much to it. There's like 3 or 4 theories. They are kind of easy to understand. There's not particularly startling conclusion anywhere, and that's all. So thank you. Enjoy. Bye.